Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and welcome to our last pieced block for our Embroidery Sampler 2 program. I can't believe that it's finally here, and it was a rocky road for some of us, but we got here. So block 9 is a little bit of a throwback to the first block that we did, because with this block we are actually doing some embroidered decorative stitches while we do those stitch and flip blocks. So to pay attention to the order and follow the instructions in our stitch and flip tutorial that we're doing with the software, as well as when we stitch them out for you in the following little video blips that I show you. Now we have rescue files in the handout, and I have a sneaking hunch that most of you are going to want to use them. Now I'm going to just take you through a quick little tour of how I did the quilting designs, but I'm keeping those on there for you. Another thing about the quilting designs is the Piece to Perfection design collection, which you got with this kit, does include a lot of different options for you. So you want to keep your eyes peeled for designs that look like they can fit in a diamond shape, which would be like a tilted square, and also triangles that can fit on the sides of our block and also in the corners. Now I altered a block to kind of tie in everything together, but unless you really want to challenge yourself with the software, you may not have to go to those lengths. Also, our color selections this month are super easy. I only added really one pop of color with our thread, and I used the Frosted Orchid this month along with some white and some of the blue. I hope you enjoy it and you can become as footloose and fancy free with this block as you would like this month. My best advice to you is, as you get started, please just build one block at a time. Now you can do one block and, up in the top part of your hoop, but do the whole block completely before you build a block in the bottom part of your hoop. And for those of you that have been doing this since the beginning, I think you know what I just said, but we've got a video to watch. So yeah, let's get started with what we need and then move into software and then move into building the block. So our fabrics this time are the navy fabrics. Now I know we've got some purpley ones in here, but it all goes together. So we have atmospheric, we have hydrangea, royal cobalt, and heart of the ocean. And then of course there's going to be a little accent of white. Now, I have my paper piecing guides here that I printed from the OESD Piece to Perfection instructions. It's page 35 from that document. And we are going to be changing up our stitching order. So I renumbered here, but of course in your handout, you're going to have my version of this where I have the correct numbers. But this is kind of how I start working to, make sure you guys do it right. So our atmospheric is going to go in this section here, and that's going to be the first piece that we place, and we're going to need 8 6.5-inch squares cut on the diagonal. Then our second one is going to be the hydrangea, and that we need 16 2.5 by 8.5 strips for that. Then we're going to have this piece, and this piece is going to be our royal cobalt, and we need 16 2.5-inch by 5-inch pieces of that. And then for this piece here, we are going to need our heart of the ocean, and that's going to be 16 2.5 by 6.5-inch pieces. And then finally, out of the white, we're going to need 8 3.5-inch squares cut on the diagonal. Now, let's go over and look and see how we create this in the software to switch up the stitching order and add some particular pizzazz to our final block. Let's have a little fun with this month's block. First, I'm doing things a little bit differently this month, and I'm going to open a new design first. Then I'm going to insert my embroidery design from my Piece to Perfection Purple Stars, and this is 12736-09. And there's our lovely little block. And now what I want to do is, first of all, change all of the colors. So color number 1 is going to remain exactly the way it is, but now as I go from 2 through the rest of the colors, I'm changing them. So now, this month we also want to change the stitching order So really the way that this block is going to stitch out is the first piece goes in this spot, the second piece goes in this spot, the third piece goes in this spot, fourth and fifth. So the order is the atmospheric half square triangle, then the hydrangea, then the cobalt, then the heart of the ocean, and then the white. So I have to redo some of these stitching orders, and that means I'm going to turn off my true view, and now I want to view my colors so that when I click on them, I can see what I'm clicking on. And it requires me taking colors 9 and 10 right here, like this, and holding down Shift, selecting the next one, and moving them all the way to the top, and then down a space. All right, that takes care of our stitching order. Pretty easy. Now, what I want to do is select color number 15, and then I want to use my Open Object tool, and I want to digitize a straight line with a pattern run. And I'm only going to do like just a little quick run of it. So I'm going to left click, enter. That's not the look I'm going for, so I'm going to select it, go to my Object Properties, find my Outline Stitch tab, select a new category under my pattern run, and this time I'm going to be choosing Satin Quilt, and I want stitch number 507, OK, apply, and OK. And now I want to rotate this around, and then I actually only want 3 little scallops, so I can go into my Reshape tool, and I can simply make my line smaller until I have just the 3 little scallops. And now I'm going to work this over here until I get it into position just so. And, you know, if I'm working on kind of getting this into the center just right, I'm going to temporarily make a line with a weird color, and I'm going to dissect my piece there and hit enter, change it to a straight line. All I'm doing here is to have something so when I adjust my little scallops there, I can kind of position them right in the middle. So now I'm going to select that line and delete it. Now, I want you to notice that right here on my little pieces, I'm going to zoom in. See how they extend past this line? We want that to happen. So if you're making this from scratch and not using our rescue file, make sure that it is going to get tucked under there. So now we need to take this file, so now we need to take this element and move it all the way to the top, and we want this to stitch just under the placement line here. Now we also want to make sure we use our single outline and maybe color number 16. And another thing that I want you to do is create a single outline that is a closed object, and we want to kind of start on the outside piece here, and I'm left clicking to the outside piece, and see how I'm going kind of at the base of that scallop and around. And enter to set your points. Now we've created a placement line for our first color. And so we want, And so now we've created a tack down stitch for this atmospheric color. And we want to move this to the top and then move it down a notch. So now we have our perforation stitch. We have our tack down stitch for our atmospheric half square triangle that goes there. And then we have our scallops. And now we can continue with our stitch and flip like you're familiar with. And there we go. Now, you know, every month we take our pieces and we have a placement line and a tack down line. So we always take our placement lines and use the arrows on our keyboard to move them into position. And that's what we're going to do here. So that's a tack down. Number 3 is a placement. I'm going to move it down. Perfect. That's where we're going to line up that raw edge. Then stitch number 4 is a tack down. Stitch number 5 is a placement, so we want to move it over. And once again, I'm using my arrow keyboard, or the arrows on my keyboard. And then stitch number 6 tacks it down. Stitch number 7 is a placement line. So once again, we're going to move that one down and maybe over a tad. And now stitch number 8 is a tack down stitch. And then stitch number 11 is a tack down stitch. Now you also must have noticed on my main piece, or my sample piece that you saw, I had a bunch of little decorative stitches. So let's go ahead and look at this in true view. So I'm going to take my open object tool again. I'm going to pick my number 17 color here, and I'm going to do a pattern run. And this time I'm going to kind of go corner to corner over that tack down line by left clicking and entering. And I want to take this stitch and change it to something else. So I'm going to go to Object Properties after I select it. And now I want to pick, I think that it's going to be a pattern run. And I am looking for satin stitches. I'm looking for home deck. And in the home deck section, there is a stitch. I love it. It's 427. It's like this little crown stitch. And I'm going to say OK and apply and OK. And the only thing that I want to change about this is I want to rotate it so it's going the other direction. And then I kind of like to take this stitch and not have it go right on the same line as my tack down stitch, because you know when we press things over and we flatten that fold, I kind of like them to be just a little bit not quite on the very edge of the stitching, so that this is going to cradle the seam. And I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to take another color, and this time I'm going to use my open object tool and pattern run. And the next color that's going to stitch out is this little section right here over that yellow line, and hit enter. And once again, I want to change this design. So I'm going to my object properties, and I want to stay in my home deck category. And there's a little bobble stitch that I love. And I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to change this because I want him to be about 4 millimeters wide. And I think that's OK. Apply and OK. Meh. Let's go back and change that. Let's make it 4 millimeters down here. That, you know what? I want it to be a little bit wider than that. Let's go up to 6. 6 and 6. And apply and OK. And look at how lovely that is. And if you wanted this to be even a little bit fatter, well, we can go here and do 9 millimeters by 9 millimeters. So once you're happy with that piece, we can go to color number 19 And we're going to do a piece here. So once again, open object, pattern run, and now we're going to go down this line. And this time I'd like to go with something a little bit more open. Maybe not heirloom, but maybe quilting. Let's see if we have some quilting ones. Oh, I just love this one. I don't even have to look any further. Number 343. And we're going to keep it as is and say okay. And look, that's a cute little stitch. And once again, if you want, you could move this over just so it's a little bit offset. But when we stitch these out, I want you to remember that you're going to make sure you really flatten out these seams and use your temporary water-soluble glue or your expert tape to hold things down into place. Our last piece is going to be color number 20, and we're going to go to open object, but we're going to pick blanket for this one, and we're simply going to stitch from corner to corner on this tack down line that you see there and hit enter. And I want to rotate this blanket stitch so it goes pointing in the other direction here. And then if we want this to be offset a little bit, that might be a good place to put it. I'm going to put it a little bit closer together. But one thing I want you to remember is that this month I really recommend that you do a practice block. And I did a practice block, and we can see how mine turned out. So every time I do one of these blocks, particularly when I do something that's a little bit new or I'm altering the actual foundation, I do a test piece. And this just doesn't cut the mustard for a couple of reasons. One is when I folded the fabrics over, they didn't fold exactly on my stitching line, so it got like a little wiggly there, and ultimately the line fell away from the piece here. And that I compensated for in the finished file, but also I changed the way I stitched it. So as we go through the stitching process with this block, you're going to see, and I'll point that out to you. Another thing is this one, because it's more satiny, it kind of got right on the edge like I wanted, but then this one, you know, was off again. And once again, if I pull this back, you can see that it just didn't get pressed over nicely. So I made another block, and this time everything is stitched into place very nicely. Now, I don't recommend taking your stabilizer off before we stitch the blocks together. However, I wanted to just see how well these stitches held up to pulling the stabilizer away. So I just wanted to have you look at this sneak peek to see, you know, the testing and everything that goes into making one of these blocks. So you saw us create this particular file, and I won't go into the details so much, but really when I tweak this to line up just on the edge, of course I'm making sure that I press each one of these over with the iron in the hoop as we stitch them out, but I also moved this just a wee bit in the file. The same with this one, I moved it just a little bit so that you can see that. And then the same with this one. That one is exactly where it needs to be as opposed to the original. And you also see a difference in colors. I actually ended up liking the more monochrome palette here, just doing the white on the scallops and then this navy blue here, and as opposed to the multicolors. But we're going to add some more embroideries after this as a block. So, all right, let's see how to stitch this out. So just like every other month, this month we're going to hoop up our medium to heavyweight tearaway stabilizer only in our hoop, do our building, and then tear everything off once we pieced our blocks into the full complete block. I have the primo, wonderful, awesome, tested stitch and flip design loaded and ready to go. I'm currently using no thread because I have all of my thread sensors turned off. So I'm simply going to take my design in my editing screen and move it to the top part of my hoop. And it's really important this month to be kind to yourself and don't try to work this so that you make 2 pieces at a time. Even though I'm using my jumbo hoop here, I'm going to do 1 complete piece, then I'm going to do 1 complete piece down here. Now I'm simply going to stitch color number 1 without the thread for all of my placement stitches. It's time to thread up our white 0015, and this month it's very special because we are not going to do any special thread tensioning. We're not going to thread it specifically for embroidery or non-embroidery. We're threading for embroidery. And it's simply because all of our little stitches from our stitch and flip at the end are going to be stitched down with decorative stitches, so it doesn't matter. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and thread with my isocord thread, and I have my bobbin thread in the bottom. Now I'm going to gently remove my work from the hoop and carefully spray just a little bit. Now, I know you're clutching your pearls right now, but I'm just going to very gently spray this. There's going to be no overspray going on my machine. Calm down. Okay, so I gently sprayed so I can place my half square triangle of atmospheric right here on top of my perforated piece. And I want to be kind of generous with my seam allowances there. I'm going about 1/4 of an inch away from my perforated line here, and I have plenty of pieces on each side. So now I'm going to attach my hoop. And now I'm going to stitch. And what this stitching line has done, it has just basted our atmospheric place into place. And if you do not do this step, you're going to get a lot of puckering in here when we do the scallop stitch, the scallop stitches that we designed. Now, there's a lot of wide kind of jump stitching happening here, and it's going to cause just a wee bit of puckering, but it is nothing that's not going to be resolved when we do our final quilting. So color number 4 is actually a little placement stitch. So this is just going to be a straight line that's going to stitch to allow us to put our next color into position. And this is the hydrangea. So hydrangea goes down right up against that stitching. And now we're going to stitch this into position. And like you've seen me do many months, I'm just kind of putting gentle pressure on this piece. And now one of the most important things that you need to do after this item, or this process, I guess, is we're going to unclip our hoop and take this over to our iron and press this piece over so everything is nice and flat. And not only nice and flat, but pulled taut. Now, you don't necessarily need to use steam for this process, but you know, I have my awesome Laura Star iron that I love so much. Okay, nice and flat. Now, in the past, I've had you use a glue stick to keep it pulled taut, or you can use expert tape. Whichever your preference is, that's what you're going to do. Okay, now it's super easy. We're just going to trim close to that stitching line. You don't have to like worry too much about getting super close. It's going to be hidden by darker fabric. It doesn't even have to be neat. It can look like you cut it with a butter knife. No one cares. Now we're bringing in that royal cobalt piece, and that lines up just like this. And you're going to just stitch this down in the same fashion. And now we're going to flip this over and press this and glue it or tape it however you would like. The next piece going on is going to be Heart of the Ocean after we stitch its placement line. And now let's trim and place our Heart of the Ocean piece into position. And one last trip to the iron to flip our piece over and press it properly and tack it down with either glue or expert tape. So this has been properly pressed and adhered. So now we're going to stitch a placement line, and this is for our little white corner, our little half square triangle that we trimmed. Now we're going to trim, and I like to trim this other little blue part here if possible. I'm going to place my piece, kind of trying to center the tip here with the center of that scallop. And now we're ready to do this stitch. Okay, so now one last trip to the iron, and then we're going to sew our tack down stitch all the way around, then change our thread color. So now we're going to change our thread. Now here's where I took the file and I split this into multiple different colors. So there is a color for each seam in your file. However, this is also the last colors to stitch in your file. So if you want all of your colors to stitch and you're using our rescue files and you want these last colors to stitch all in the same color like me, this is where you're going to engage your monochromatic feature on your machine, and it's going to stitch these last 13, 14, 15, and 16 colors all in the same color. Once this is complete, it's time to hit the little checkered flag and move the design down into the bottom of the hoop to do your second piece in the hoop. And now, like waving a magic wand, it's a lot of rinse and repeat. And don't forget to uncheck that monochromatic button, or it's going to perforate all of the stitches for this last one. Ask me how I know. Well, have you ever had this problem? I accidentally forgot to thread my bobbin for embroidery on my 880 Plus. And I tried to go back and restitch it with it threaded the correct way, but there were still a little bit of white dots showing. Well, I like to keep quite an array of Sharpie markers handy because I was able to fix this to the point where when I line this block up with my other blocks, I can't really tell that this happened. So this is just a pro tip, or a tip for those of you that just don't want to stitch 17 of these blocks instead of 16. So we're going to trim, and don't forget, when we trim our blocks, we want to make sure that we're trimming them consistently with how we've trimmed in other months. So for instance, if you are trimming right on the line, you're going to trim all of your blocks right on the line. It's time to sew them into a 4-patch, and then sew those 4 patches into the block and trim your stabilizer. So once you have your little quadrants sewn together, before we put those together in the 4-patch, I want to add, remember our little fluffy pink flower that we did on block 1? Well, we thought we'd like to kick it retro, and I'm going to add one to the center of this piece, just like we did on block 1 after we got those 4 blocks together. So all I'm going to do is use my small embroidery hoop. And if you had some little stabilizer scraps, now would be a good time to use those. So I'm just going to squeeze in just some stabilizer in this small hoop. And you know what? This little guy is tight. Sometimes you might even want to loosen it up just a little bit, or when they're brand new, I take the screw all the way out. There we go. But this is not a new hoop, so I can now tighten just a little bit. So this is going to be in there like this, and we're going to just, you know, we can do a basting box to tell us kind of where that flower is going to be. Then we can sit this down there with some 505 spray, do the basting box again, and then put the flower right in the center on that intersection of those seams. Now we want to take this seam and kind of center it right in this little box. And I'm going to just do this quickly by repeating the basting. And it doesn't matter if we get it perfect or not. I'm just using the basting to just hold my piece in the hoop. And as you can see in this example, there's no way this flower is gonna stitch right there based on where this held it in. So that's why I'm gonna go back to my edit screen. I'm going to touch my pinpoint placement, and I'm going to use the grid, touch the center, and then move my knobs so that my foot goes right over that center intersection of my seam, and then I can use my needle or my hand wheel to kind of get my needle in the right position that I want. And I'm good there. So now it's time to just go back and stitch my design. Now that this is finished, we can rip out the basting stitches and pull this off of the hoop and tear the stabilizer off. And some of you might be asking this question. I did double stabilize because I had the stabilizer on these stitch and flip blocks already. However, it's going to tear away pretty easily off of this one, and I wanted to keep the stabilizer on so when I sew things together, it's a little bit easier putting those 4 patches together. So here is my batting and the backing that we've been using, this pretty print. And I'm going to center my quadrants that have been stitched together and the stabilizer's been ripped off the back. I'm going to just kind of put this here like this, use a little bit of the 505 adhesive spray to get this together, and leave a little border of the backing and the batting. Now, the most important thing that I want to take care of right now is the size of this square. And I'm not going to measure from corner to corner to corner. I want to measure inside from this scallop stitch that we created. And that measurement comes out to be about 5 inches. I'm going to actually say 4.5, because 4.5 is going to allow just a little bit of ridge where I'm going to stipple. So I'm going to take one of our designs from the Piece to Perfection that's a quilting design, and we're going to put that right in the middle of this. And then we're going to take that same design and put half of the design in this area, a quadrant of the design in the corners, and that will get this quilted very nicely. But of course, I would like to actually come back and do maybe a little square around my flowers, just a little bit like that. And then I'm thinking of doing the wishbones in my hyacinth fabric, and then maybe just a little stitch in the ditch with that dark blue thread around my pieces there, and then the quilting's going to be complete. So I want to open a design from our Piece to Perfection collection. And we have like a ton of quilting designs to choose from. And we used this one in block 5, which was number 18. And we used 17, I believe, in block 6 maybe. And I'm just kind of looking for something that I can do that kind of represents how I feel about this block. And I also want something that's going to kind of lend itself to a little stipple background where I can add some different texture. So number 10 is a contender. Ooh, I really like this one if we connect it together. I think I'm going to do 15. So now doing this, I want to zoom out a little bit because I also want to select it and I want to do a mirror merge horizontal and vertical. And I want to connect them together. So that means I want to overlap them just a little bit so that it'll make this a continuous design. Let's see if this does the trick. Not quite, but that's okay. Now what I can do is kind of move it a little bit and play with it because I also have another option, which is weld. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to get rid of my grid and my hoop so I can really see what's happening close in these corners here, and see if I show my work here and show my reshape tool. I might actually want to bring this in just a little bit so that it touches more like that. And then let's zoom in down here on this corner and see how these guys are lining up. That looks good. And now let's zoom in over here. And I'm just double checking all of these intersections so that they overlap. And then one more to check here. It's right down here. Perfect. Okay, and I'm going to go to Design, Auto Start and End at the first stitch of the design and the last stitch of the design. And now I want to show my hoop and fit to hoop again. And then I'm going to right click on my hoop and just say don't start it at the needle position so it's centered. And now let's just take our selection tool. All right, so now I'm going to do a little select all on this, and I'm going to go up to Edit, and I want to select Weld, and just any entry point on the design will do. And now what that's doing is it's connected all of these lines together. Now, obviously, when I select on this, and we look up here, let's change our measurement system to US. We can see here that the width is 10.048 and 9.7. Well, I'm going to take my proportion lock off, and we wanted this to be about 4.5 by 4.5. That looks pretty good. And this is going to stitch on our block at a 45-degree angle like this. So let's look at this up close. So what I'm going to do first is save this design in my block 9 category, and I'm going to call this Quilt Center. Before you reach for your Xanax for this next software exercise, I promise it is only for the experts out there. Don't forget that I'm going to give you the exact files that I used in your presentation interactive handout that you get every time we do a block. But I also want you to keep in mind that you can do your own thing. So let's look at some of the other designs on your Piece to Perfection design collection that might be appropriate. So starting at about page 6 are the quilting designs, and this one would be perfectly wonderful for a corner. You could also turn it to the side and enlarge it to be a side. You could do these again. There's so many different things. Here's something that could be a corner and a side. So you don't really have to stress about this. I just decided to use this number 15 because I wanted to torture you because it's the final block. All right, that's our public service announcement. And then what I'm going to do is select all and use my knife and cut this in half. And now I am going to delete everything below that line. And now my main goal here is to kind of connect this together so it forms a finished kind of look here. So let's get everything here that we cut away. I'm going to just take all of this here. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to select this and do my reshape tool. And I'm going to put this down there. We'll worry about the little pointy bits later. Let's see here. And I'm just playing with it a little bit. Just kind of getting everything kind of connected together so it looks nice. And this just takes fiddling with. And then let's move that up there. Let's add this over here. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, let's view the whole thing. I think I need to kind of get rid of some of these nodes so it looks a little smoother down there. Maybe this needs to kind of go. Okay, I can live with that. And now let's mosey on over here. And I'm going to take this unit and copy it and paste and mirror. And now take this piece and I'm gonna delete a bunch of these nodes and move it down to here. This design is asymmetric, so it makes it a little bit weird, but we can work with it. I think that'll work. I like it. So now I'm going to select all, and we're going to weld it again by selecting a piece here, and now we have one continuous piece. And if we can even check for our jump stitches, and we don't have any jump stitches, so that looks really cool. So now we can save this as quilt center rather than center, quilt sides. And now I have one more to create, and that's going to be the corner. So I'm going to go right down the center and cut, deselect, and now select everything on, I think I'm going to do everything on this side. There we go. And now what I'd like to do with this is I'm going to take this piece and delete it, and delete this piece, and this piece, and this piece. And now I'm going to reshape and get rid of these nodes to about there. And then I'm going to make another cut just there. And that's going to allow me to simply select this again, Control C, Control V, and I'm going to mirror it and rotate it 90 degrees. And move it into position right there. And now let's see the whole thing. And I'm going to do my manual centering, because with this grid, I want to make sure that I have something symmetric. So we've got like one, it's not quite symmetric here. If we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 9 blocks, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. Okay, so what I think we need to do is move this one down a couple blocks, about like that. So that means I need to do a little bit of reconfiguring here. So all I need to do now is just reshape this so it goes down here. So it looks a little bit more like see how I'm moving these little nodes to kind of get them into position? I don't care if it's not perfectly symmetric. Okay, so that's going to be my corner. And before I save it, I want to weld it together again to eliminate the jump stitches. And now I'm going to say File, Save As, Quilt Corner. And now I'm going to send these to my machine and quilt. So this month, our little quilt is a little bit thick to fit in our hoop. It's a little bit thick to put it in the medium clamp hoop because the little clips are just too tight with some of these seams. Don't fear. What we're going to do is use a water-soluble stabilizer, like our aqua mesh here, and we're going to only put the aqua mesh in our hoop. Okay, then much like we did that flower, we're going to just gently place our piece right here, kind of in the middle of the hoop. I mean, you could use the placement template if you wanted, just to kind of make sure you're getting everything right. Let's turn that light off so we don't have the reflection. So you can try to get it lined up just so to get it ready for basting, but we have some wiggle room, so I don't really need to rely too much on this template. So this is how I'm going to do this piece. So we're going to start off just stitching the center, and I'm using my white cerulean thread. I've just gently placed this onto that aqua mesh that's hooped up on my square medium clamp hoop, and I'm going to baste. And like I mentioned before we came over to the machine, I've got my cerulean thread in the top and in the bottom. So let's do my thread up down command to get that bottom thread up to the top so we can hold on to it to do our basting. All right, so this might not be perfectly centered, just like when we did our flowers, but now what I'm going to do is go back to my pinpoint placement. So I'm going to my edit screen. I'm going to select pinpoint placement, and I'm going to put my needle at the center of the design and then move using my multifunction knobs to get to the center. And once I'm at the center, I hit my set button, and then I touch like the top bar to see if I'm indeed on the middle of that line, and I touch the bottom bar. And if I really were doing this for reals, I think I want to move my little design just a little bit and then double check at the top here. That looks perfect. So now I'm ready to stitch this out. I'm going to skip my basting because I already did it. And now I'm going to raise my presser foot, pull my thread, do another thread up command because now I'm doing some quilting. And remember, when we do quilting, we're going to loosen our bobbin tension on the 880 by not threading it for embroidery, and our thread tension gets set to 4.25. Okay, so now I'm going to gently undo my basting and rehoop another hooping of water-soluble stabilizer, and I'm going to need 4 pieces to do the sides and 4 pieces to do the corners. And I'm not going to wash my block when I'm done. I'm going to use a wet washcloth technique to get that water soluble off, and you know, just so we keep the integrity of our block a little bit. Now for these side blocks and the corner blocks, I've opted to go with smaller hoops. So for the side pieces, I'm going to use my large oval hoop. For the corner pieces, I'll use the medium hoop. It's just kind of easier to handle the quilt this way. And it's also helpful to conserve some of your stabilizer since we're only needing small pieces of it. So let me show you the other one that's stitched out. I think it looks pretty good. And you can see here on the back, I just have a little bit of the water soluble. Now, one of the benefits of the aqua mesh stabilizer is that it doesn't take much to dissolve it. So instead of like dipping this and immersing it in water, when we're all done with all of the quilting, I'm going to take a wet washcloth and kind of soak the back and peel the stabilizer off. And that's just to reduce the agitation that I might need to do on my pretty quilt block here. But there was really not another way to really do this technique this month. So I'm going to line the sides up on my large oval hoop and try to get things as straight as possible. And it will be very handy to spray the aqua mesh with the 505. Just as you're getting it to the machine, it will help a lot. And if it started to come a little loose in your piece there, you can go ahead and spray your batting and get it adhered into position. So when you bring your design into the hoop, you may need to rotate it depending on what orientation it is. My design is the tip is over here on the side, so I'm just going to rotate it 180 degrees. Then I'm going to open up pinpoint placement, and I'm going to use the grid and use the left center dot to line my needle up right with that point I created with my water-soluble pen. Just kind of get it to where I want it. And then I hit set. And then I'm also going to test it over here on the seam, and I need to back up a little bit this way. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and stitch this out and engage the basting function. And now this might wiggle while I do my basting. So what I want you to keep in mind is once you do your basting, you're going to go back and check and make sure that your piece is still centered exactly where you want it. So I'm using my pinpoint placement again, and I'm just making sure that everything is happy. Okay, so now we only have 3 more to go. And just a tip, before you are ready to do your next piece, as we're going and doing these side pieces again and again, I like to make sure I clear out any changes that might have occurred when we engage pinpoint placement. You see how that should be 180, but because I had to kind of tilt it, it's 177. Let's go ahead and clear that out. And then let's go ahead and go to pinpoint placement and unlock it, or free the butterfly, as I like to say. And then finally, I just have to go back now and rotate this the original 180 degrees to get everything square. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my pinpoint placement again, lining up this corner piece here with the tip of my triangle, and then I'm going to set it. Then I'm going to check on this side, and it looks like it is just almost perfect. And now I'm ready to stitch it out. And don't be alarmed with the basting function. You can baste first and then do your pinpoint placement if you like. It might be a little bit easier just so you get everything nice and straight. For our corners, I've got my piece in my hoop. You can see just the stabilizer there. I 505'd my stuff down. I'm squeezing my hoop on my machine, and I've selected the design. And everything is oriented the way that I want. But before I do any pinpoint placement, I am just going to simply engage my basting function and baste my piece down. I think you're going to find this much easier, but you can do either way. You can, pinpoint placement first, baste, then check, then baste again, or we can just start by basting something in the hoop here. All right, so now I'm going to go to my pinpoint placement, which means I have to go to my edit screen. And now I'm going to touch the bottom corner of the grid. So I touch the grid, then that bottom corner one. I'm going to lower my presser foot, and I'm going to turn this so that I'm in about 1/4 inch from my sides. And I'm using the edge of my foot as a guide. I'm going to set that one, and then I'm actually going to look over here on the side, on the left bottom or the right bottom corner, and see if I'm still in about 1/4 inch. And maybe I need to move it up just a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to close my pinpoint placement and use my virtual positioning to touch my design and make sure I'm not going to be stitching into my white scallops, which I'm not. So now I'm ready to stitch again. This time I'm skipping the basting because I already basted. And now I'm going to do my thread up command. Pull my bobbin thread up and stitch. And that little guy was trying to wiggle in our way, and that's why you don't leave your machine for too long. So we just have to repeat this process 3 more times, and then I am going to dissolve my water soluble stabilizer and let my work rest for a little bit so it can dry before I do my finishing touches with my BERNINA Stitch Regulator. Okay, so here's my washcloth, and I'm just going to gently dampen it, and then that will release our stuff, and we can pick at it with our tweezers as that water permeates the piece. But this will help us get this off without shrinking our fabric or anything like that. I mean, we could dissolve this in water. We could like put the whole thing in there, but this will be good enough. And then we can also, once we kind of get all these lumps out, we can also soak it again to dissolve the stabilizer. For this project, when I was using the stitch regulator, I used mode 1 because when I hesitate, I like the needle to remain going up and down rhythmically. I also had set my stitch length to 1.75, which is slightly closer together than the default setting of 2.0. And because there's a lot of seams and thickness in this block, I actually adjusted the presser foot pressure to 40 rather than the default setting of 50. I'm using my straight stitch needle plate, and I am just taking it nice and slow with these wishbones. when I went on to do the stipple, because I changed my mind and decided I didn't want any straight lines on this, so I stippled behind our little frosted orchid flowers, and in that case I had to take my stitch length all the way down to like 1.3. My simulator is a little weird and it doesn't let me represent that on the screen here, but your machine is going to let you tweak that stitch length just a little bit, because I did a very tiny stipple behind those flowers, and the tinier your stippling, the closer together your stitches need to be. All right, well, what do you think? Do you like this block as much as I do? I'm getting really fond of the wishbone quilting technique that I did in this hyacinth color. So hopefully you have found some creative quilting skills of your own that you might want to use, because in the next couple of months, we are going to be doing quilted borders, and that means sashing and the borders. And we're going to have 2 months to do that. So get this block done, start practicing some of your doodling skills, and maybe even some of those computer skills to put this thing all together. All right, well, I hope that you had a good time watching this month's block, and don't forget to check out our other videos on our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. And guess what? We still have a few Embroidery Sampler 2 kits ready. And you know what? It's never too late to start. Even though we're on block 9, you can start at block 1, because these videos live forever and you can go at your own pace. But for those of you that have been sewing along, thank you. And we'll see you next month via Zoom and in person for those of you who join us in the store. See ya.